I stopped to help a stranger on the highway. It was the kind of simple decision you make without thinking, just pulling over when you see someone in need. But that one choice changed everything. 3 days later, his wife would knock on my door holding a will with my name on it, and I'd discover that nothing about that encounter was coincidence. My name is James Hamilton, and I'm a civil engineer here in Billings, Montana. It's honest work, steady work, though sometimes I wonder about the roads not taken, like that architecture degree I never finished. But on that particular Tuesday in late September, I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was just tired, driving home on Highway 87 after a long meeting with contractors about the new bridge project downtown. The sun was dropping low over the Beartooth Mountains, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. That's when I saw him. An elderly man standing beside a classic car on the shoulder, the hood propped open like a white flag of surrender. He was waving at passing vehicles, but in typical Montana fashion, the traffic was sparse. I could have driven past. Most people would have. Cell phones work out here most of the time, and AAA exists for a reason. But my father raised me differently. Never pass someone stranded, he used to say. So I slowed down, pulled onto the gravel shoulder, and climbed out of my truck. "Afternoon," I called out, approaching carefully. You never know these days. The man turned, and I got my first real look at him. He was somewhere in his 70s, I'd guess, with silver hair, neatly combed, and deep lines etched around his eyes. The kind that come from years of squinting at blueprints or balance sheets. He wore pressed slacks and a button-down shirt, dressed too formally for a breakdown on a rural highway. "Thank God," he said, relief flooding his face. "I've been here almost an hour, no signal." He held up an expensive-looking smartphone as evidence. "What seems to be the problem?" "Engine just quit on me. No warning, no sputtering, just dead." He shook his head ruefully. "I'm Robert, by the way. James Hamilton." We shook hands, his grip surprisingly firm for his age. "Let me take a look." "I'm no mechanic, but I know enough to check the basics. Oil was fine. Battery connections looked solid. When I tried the ignition, nothing. Not even a click. Could be the starter, could be electrical. Either way, you're not driving this anywhere tonight." Robert nodded, accepting the diagnosis with remarkable calm. That's when I really noticed the car. A Lincoln Continental, probably from the 80s, but maintained like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. The chrome gleamed, the leather interior looked pristine. This wasn't just transportation. This was somebody's pride and joy. "I can give you a tow into town," I offered. "There's a mechanic shop on Central Avenue that does good work, Pete's Auto Repair." "I'd appreciate that more than you know," Robert said quietly. We hooked up my tow strap, and I pulled the Lincoln carefully onto the highway, Robert steering from behind. As we drove, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror at that beautiful old car and at the man behind the wheel. Everything about the situation felt slightly off, though I couldn't put my finger on why. The car was worth serious money, and that watch on his wrist? I'm no expert, but it looked like a Patek Philippe, the kind of timepiece that costs more than my truck. Who was this guy? And why was he driving alone on a back highway in Montana, dressed like he had a business meeting, in a collector's car? The question nagged me all the way to Pete's shop, but I kept my mouth shut. In Montana, you learn to respect privacy. If someone wants to tell you their story, they will. What I didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Robert already knew exactly who I was. And in 3 days, when I opened the newspaper and saw his obituary, my entire world would turn upside down. The drive into Billings took about 20 minutes, and Robert used every one of them to ask me questions. At first, I figured he was just making conversation, filling the awkward silence that comes with being towed by a stranger. But looking back now, I realize he was searching for something. Confirmation, maybe, of who I was. "So, James Hamilton," he said through my open window when we stopped at a red light, "What brings you out this way on a Tuesday evening?" "Work meeting. I'm a civil engineer. Bridges, mostly. We're starting a new project downtown." "Civil engineering," he repeated, and something flickered across his face. "Ever think about doing something else? Architecture, maybe? Design work?" The question caught me off guard. "Actually, yeah. I started in architecture at Montana State. Made it 3 years before I switched to engineering." I laughed, but it sounded hollow even to me. "More practical, better job prospects." "Practical," Robert echoed. He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I wonder if we give up too much in the name of practical." There was a weight to his words that made me glance in the mirror again. His expression had turned distant, melancholy even. "You okay back there?" "Fine, fine." He waved a hand. "Just an old man's musings." "You have family here in Billings, James?" "Just me now. My mom passed 8 years ago. Dad died about 15 years back." "I'm sorry to hear that. Were you close with your father?" Another strange question, but something in his tone made me answer honestly. "Very. He was a good man. Worked construction most of his life, until he couldn't anymore." Until he couldn't. I hesitated. It wasn't a story I told often. There was an incident at a job site. He spoke up about some safety issues, and it cost him. Blacklisted, basically. We had to move, start over. He changed our last name, found work where he could. It broke something in him, I think. Robert didn't respond immediately. When I checked the mirror, I saw him gripping the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white. "He sounds like a man of principle." He was. We pulled into Pete's auto repair just as the sun touched the horizon. Pete himself came out, wiping his hands on a greasy rag, and I explained the situation. He'd have to look at it in the morning, but Robert could leave the car overnight. I offered to drive him wherever he needed to go. "That won't be necessary," Robert said. "I'll call someone. You've done more than enough already." But as we stood there in the parking lot, him pulling out his phone, me preparing to leave, he suddenly reached out and gripped my shoulder. The gesture was almost desperate. "Thank you, son," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on the last word. His eyes were locked on mine, searching for something. "You have no idea what this means." "It was just a ride into town," I wanted to say, but the intensity in his face stopped me. "Just doing what my dad taught me," I said instead. He smiled then, sad, knowing, final. "Yes," he whispered, "I can see him in you." Before I could ask what he meant, he'd turned away, phone to his ear. I climbed into my truck, confused and vaguely unsettled. As I drove home, I kept replaying the conversation, the questions about my father, that strange comment at the end, the way he looked at me like he was seeing someone else. 3 days later, I was having my morning coffee when I unfolded the Billings Gazette and saw the headline in the obituaries section. "Robert Ashford, 72, local business leader, dies suddenly." The photograph showed the same man I'd helped on the highway, the same silver hair, the same deep-set eyes. Robert Ashford, owner and founder of Ashford Industries, one of the largest construction firms in Montana. Net worth estimated in the tens of millions. And according to the article, he died of a heart attack in his sleep exactly 2 days after our encounter on Highway 87. My hands started shaking so badly I spilled coffee across the obituary page. For a week, I couldn't stop thinking about Robert Ashford. I read everything I could find about him online. Articles about his business, his philanthropy, his decades building Montana's infrastructure. There were photos of him at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, shaking hands with governors and mayors. In every image, he wore that same expression I'd seen in the parking lot, a man carrying invisible weight. I told myself the encounter was just a strange coincidence. I'd helped the dying man in his final days, unknowingly.
Maybe that's why it seemed so emotional, so intense. He must have known something was wrong with his heart. But it didn't explain why he'd asked all those questions about my father. The answer came on a Saturday morning, exactly 8 days after Robert's death. I was in my workshop behind the house, trying to repair a bookshelf I'd built years ago that was finally coming apart. The doorbell rang just after 10. When I opened the front door, I found a woman standing on my porch. She was elegant in a way that spoke of old money. Pearl earrings, a tailored coat despite the mild weather, perfectly styled gray hair. She looked to be in her mid-60s, and her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying recently. "Mr. Hamilton, James Hamilton." Her voice was soft, cultured. "Yes? My name is Eleanor Ashford. I believe you met my husband Robert shortly before he passed." My stomach dropped. "Mrs. Ashford, yes, I'm so sorry for your loss. He seemed like a remarkable man." He was. Her smile was fragile. "May I come in? I need to speak with you about something urgent." I stepped aside, my mind racing. Why would Robert Ashford's widow come to my house? How did she even know where I lived? Eleanor sat primly on my worn sofa, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. I offered coffee, which she declined. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken purpose. "Mr. Hamilton, James Hamilton, I'm here because my husband left very specific instructions. After he died, I found a note in his study. It told me to contact you immediately and to bring certain documents." "I don't understand. I only met your husband once. I helped him with his car." "I know. He told me about it. In fact, he came home that evening and went straight to his attorney." Eleanor opened her handbag with trembling hands. "He changed his will that very night, Mr. Hamilton. He worked until almost midnight revising it." The room seemed to tilt. "Changed his will?" "Yes." She pulled out a manila envelope, official-looking and sealed with a law firm's embossed stamp. "Robert died 2 days later. The doctor said it was a massive heart attack in his sleep. Painless, at least. But these papers, they were filed legally, witnessed, binding." She held the envelope toward me, but I couldn't make myself take it. "Mrs. Ashford, I think there's been a mistake. I'm nobody. Why would your husband change his will because I gave him a ride?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "That's what I thought too. At first, I was angry, confused. We'd been married for 42 years and suddenly he's leaving assets to a stranger." She wiped her eyes carefully. "But then I read the letter he left for me, and I understood." "Understood what?" She stood, placing the envelope on the coffee table between us. "Mr. Hamilton, James, my husband altered his will 2 days before he died. In it, you are named as a beneficiary. Your name is right here in these documents." The envelope sat there like a coiled snake. I couldn't breathe properly. "There's more," Eleanor continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Robert left instructions, conditions. He said there are things you need to know, things he couldn't tell you when you met, things about your father." My head snapped up. "My father? What does my father have to do with this?" Eleanor's hand shook as she pointed to the envelope. "It's all in there. The will, the property deed, the letter Robert wrote for you. But Mr. Hamilton, James, before you open that, you need to understand something." She stepped closer, her expression intense. "My husband didn't choose you randomly. That meeting on the highway, he'd been looking for you for 25 years.
I stared at Eleanor Ashford, trying to process her words. 25 years? That was impossible. I would have been a teenager. My father was still alive. We were living under a different name in a different town, hiding from... "Open it," Eleanor said, gently, gesturing to the envelope. "You need to see for yourself." My hands were unsteady as I broke the seal. Inside were multiple documents, legal papers, a letter in Robert's handwriting, and a photograph that made my heart stop.
It showed a younger Robert Ashford, maybe in his 50s, shaking hands with a construction worker. The worker's face was partially turned away, but I recognized him instantly. It was my father. "I don't understand," I whispered. Eleanor sat back down, composing herself. "Let me explain what Robert told me. My husband built Ashford Industries from nothing, starting in the 1970s. By the 1990s, we were one of the largest construction firms in the state. But success breeds competition, and not all of it was ethical." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "In 1999, there was an incident at a job site in Great Falls, a building project, a shopping complex. Robert had bid on it but lost to a cheaper competitor, a company called Titan Construction. A few months into the project, one of Titan's workers came to Robert. He'd discovered serious safety violations, structural shortcuts that could kill people." My throat tightened. "My father. Yes, your father worked for Titan. He brought Robert documentation, photographs, everything. He wanted to do the right thing, but he was afraid of retaliation. Robert promised to protect him. They planned to go to the state authorities together. But..." I already knew there was a but. There was always a but in stories like this. "But Titan found out before they could act. They had connections, inspectors on their payroll, officials who looked the other way. Your father was fired immediately and blacklisted across the industry. Robert tried to hire him at Ashford Industries, but Titan threatened legal action, claimed industrial espionage, made it impossible." Eleanor's voice cracked. "Robert never forgave himself for failing to protect your father. He tried to find him afterward, tried to help, but your family had disappeared." I was reading Robert's letter now, my vision blurring. "James, if you're reading this, then I've run out of time. For 25 years, I've searched for Thomas Hamilton, the man who tried to do the right thing and lost everything because I couldn't protect him. I hired investigators. I searched records. Nothing. Your father was too good at disappearing. Then, by grace or fate, you stopped to help someone on a highway. When you told me your name, when you mentioned your father, I knew. You have his eyes, his integrity, that same instinct to help someone in need, even when it's inconvenient. I went home that night and called my attorney immediately. I don't have much time left. I can feel it. But I can do this one thing. I can try to repay a debt I should have paid decades ago." Eleanor handed me another document. "This is the will. Robert left you $500,000 and a property, 50 acres with a house, about 30 miles outside Billings. It was his private retreat, the place he went to think. $500,000? I couldn't even conceive of that much money. My salary was comfortable, but this was life-changing. Mrs. Ashford, I can't accept this. It's too much. I didn't do anything to deserve—" "Your father did," she interrupted firmly, "and Robert believed you'd understand that. But James, there's something else, a condition in the will." Of course there was. Eleanor leaned forward, her expression grave. "Before you can claim the inheritance, you have to visit the property and you have to find something Robert left there for you. He was very specific, something hidden that will explain everything." His exact words. "What am I supposed to find?" "I don't know. Robert wouldn't tell me. He said only you would understand its significance when you found it." She reached across and gripped my hand. "But he also said this: James will have to choose. When he knows the full truth, he'll have to decide what kind of man he is." A chill ran down my spine. "What truth?" Eleanor stood, preparing to leave. She looked exhausted, like this conversation had drained her. "The address is in the documents. The property is yours to access immediately. That was arranged with the estate. Robert's attorney will contact you Monday about the financial details." She walked to the door, then turned back.
My husband was a good man, James. Not perfect. He made mistakes, carried guilt, but he spent his last evening on earth making sure you'd have choices he couldn't give your father. Don't waste that gift. After she left, I sat in my living room for an hour, just staring at the papers. The photograph of my father and Robert, the letter, the deed to a property I'd never seen. Finally, I called in sick to work Monday and Tuesday because Eleanor was right about one thing. I had to see that property. I had to find whatever Robert had hidden there. I had to know the full truth.
The property was about 40 minutes outside Billings, down a series of increasingly rural roads that eventually turned to gravel. The GPS coordinates Eleanor had given me led to a narrow driveway marked only by a weathered mailbox with no name. I almost missed it. The driveway wound through a grove of cottonwood trees, their leaves golden with autumn, before opening into a clearing, and there it was. A two-story ranch house, probably built in the 1950s, painted a faded red with white trim. Behind it stretched 50 acres of rolling grassland, ending at a tree line about half a mile away. The Beartooth Mountains rose in the distance, magnificent and indifferent. The house looked abandoned. Windows were dusty, the porch sagged slightly, but when I tried the front door with the key Eleanor had provided, it opened smoothly, recently oiled hinges. Someone had been maintaining this place. Inside, the air was stale, but not musty. Dust covers draped the furniture in the living room. I pulled one back to reveal a leather armchair positioned near a stone fireplace. Everything was dated. Wood paneling, floral wallpaper, linoleum in the kitchen, but clean, cared for. I started searching systematically. Kitchen cabinets held old dishes. The bedroom upstairs contained a simple bed, dresser, and closet with a few changes of clothes, Robert's size. In the bathroom, I found toiletries, a razor, evidence that he'd stayed here recently. But it was the second bedroom that made me stop cold. It had been converted into an office. A large desk dominated the center, covered with papers, notebooks, and drafting tools. The walls were plastered with photographs, dozens of them, construction sites, buildings, blueprints, and at the center of one wall, a timeline sketched in Robert's handwriting. 1999 was circled in red. Notes branched out from it: Titan Construction, Thomas Hamilton, Great Falls Project. Lines connected to other dates, other names, other projects. I picked up one of the notebooks. Robert's handwriting filled every page, neat, methodical, obsessive. He had been tracking Titan Construction and its successor companies for decades. He documented safety violations, payoffs, accidents, names of workers who'd been injured or killed, evidence that had never been made public. My father's name appeared throughout: Thomas Hamilton, the witness who'd tried to stop it all, the man whose career had been destroyed for speaking up. I sat at the desk reading until the light faded and I had to turn on lamps. Robert had been building a case, piece by piece, year by year. But why? What had he planned to do with all this? The answer had to be somewhere in this house. I searched until well after midnight. The attic was full of old furniture and boxes of Christmas decorations. The basement held canned goods and camping equipment. I was about to give up when I noticed something odd about the attic floor. One section of the floorboards didn't quite match the others. The wood was slightly newer, the nails less tarnished. I pulled at the boards, and they came up easily. Too easily. Underneath was a metal box, about the size of a small suitcase. No lock, just a simple latch. And on the lid, engraved in neat letters, James Hamilton. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside were documents, legal files, depositions, photographs, but on top of everything was a letter addressed to me in Robert's handwriting. I unfolded it, my heart pounding. James, if you found this, you're braver than I expected. Most people would have taken the money and walked away, but you're like your father. You need to understand. You need to know why. Everything in this box is evidence. 25 years of investigation into Titan construction and the companies that succeeded it. Your father was right. They cut corners, bribed inspectors, put profit over human lives. 3 people died in building collapses linked to Titan. Dozens were injured, and it never stopped. I tried to expose them in 1999, but without your father as a witness, I had nothing that would hold up in court. He disappeared, and I couldn't blame him. They had already destroyed his life. Why should he risk more? But I never forgot. I kept investigating. I documented everything. And now, after all these years, I finally have enough evidence to bring them down, if someone is willing to use it. That someone is you, James. When you stopped to help me on that highway, I saw your father's kindness in your eyes. It wasn't coincidence. It was destiny giving me a second chance to pay a debt. But there's more you need to know. Much more. At the bottom of this box, you'll find a file marked Thomas Hamilton, Full Report. Read it. Then go see Eleanor. She has the last piece of the puzzle, the part I couldn't write down, the part that explains everything. And then, James, you'll have to choose. Take the money and forget all this, or finish what your father started. Either way, I'll understand. But know this, kindness is never coincidence. It's a choice we make, again and again, even when it costs us everything. I pulled out the file he'd mentioned. It was thick, filled with documents. I opened to the first page and started reading. 10 minutes later, I had to sit down. My hands were shaking too badly to hold the papers. Because what Robert had discovered about my father, about the real reason Titan had targeted him so viciously, changed everything I thought I knew about that day in 1999. And it meant the people who destroyed my father's life were still out there, still building, still cutting corners, still getting away with it.
I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed at the ranch house, reading through every document in that metal box by lamplight, and with each page, my understanding of my father's sacrifice deepened. The file marked Thomas Hamilton, Full Report, told a story I'd never known. My father hadn't just discovered safety violations at that Titan construction site in Great Falls. He'd uncovered something much bigger, a systematic conspiracy involving multiple construction firms, corrupt building inspectors, and city officials taking bribes to approve substandard work. The shopping complex in Great Falls was just one project. There were 12 others across Montana and Wyoming, schools, hospitals, apartment buildings, all built with the same dangerous shortcuts. My father had photographs of load-bearing walls made with inferior concrete, electrical systems installed without proper code compliance, fire suppression systems that existed only on paper. He'd gone to Robert Ashford because Robert had a reputation for integrity. Together, they'd planned to take everything to the state attorney general. They'd had a meeting scheduled for May 15, 1999. On May 12th, Titan Construction found out. I don't know how, maybe someone Robert trusted betrayed them, or maybe my father's questions at work had raised red flags. But according to Robert's notes, Titan didn't just fire my father. They went after him with everything they had. They accused him of theft, industrial espionage. They claimed he'd been trying to sell trade secrets to competitors. It was all fabricated, but Titan had lawyers and money and connections. My father had nothing. Robert tried to help, but Titan's attorneys threatened a lawsuit that would have bankrupted Ashford Industries if Robert hired my father or used any of his evidence. So my father ran. He changed our name from Hamilton to Henley. I'd grown up as James Henley until my mother finally told me the truth after he died. We moved from town to town, my father taking whatever construction work he could find under the table. He never spoke about what happened. I only learned the basics from my mother years later, that he'd tried to do the right thing and been punished for it. What I hadn't known, what made me sit on that dusty floor and weep at 3 in the morning, was that my father had kept copies of everything. He'd mailed them to Robert Ashford the day before he ran, with a note, "If anything happens to me, make them pay. For all the workers who will get hurt because I wasn't brave enough to stay. Robert had kept that promise for 25 years. The documents in the box were meticulous. Robert had tracked Titan's successor companies. They dissolved Titan in 2001, but the same people started new firms under different names. He'd connected them to building failures, injuries, even deaths. He'd compiled evidence that would stand up in court. He'd found other whistleblowers who'd been silenced, other families who'd lost loved ones to Titan's negligence. And there, near the bottom of the box, was a list of names, witnesses, people willing to testify if someone ever brought a case. Robert had spent decades finding them, convincing them, keeping their statements ready. But he'd never filed charges, never gone public. According to his notes, without my father as the key witness, the one who'd started everything, who documented the original crimes, the case wasn't strong enough. Defense attorneys would tear it apart. The corrupt officials would claim the evidence was fabricated.
Robert needed a Hamilton to step forward. He'd searched for my father for years, not knowing he was dead. Then, by impossible chance, I'd stopped to help him on Highway 87. I understood now why he'd gripped my shoulder so desperately in that parking lot, why he'd said, "I can see him in you." He'd been looking at his last chance for justice. As dawn broke over the Montana grassland, I sat at Robert's desk and opened the final envelope in the box. Inside was a letter he'd written just days before his death. "James, when you stopped to help me, I recognized your father's kindness, but I also recognized the same choice he faced. Do you stand up for what's right, even when it costs you everything? Your father chose principle over security. It destroyed his career, forced him into hiding, robbed him of the life he deserved. I watched it happen and couldn't stop it. That failure has haunted me for 25 years. Now I'm giving you the same choice, but with a difference. You have resources he didn't. The inheritance isn't a gift, it's armor. It's enough money to protect yourself from the kind of retaliation your father faced, enough to hire lawyers, to weather lawsuits, to fight back. The people who destroyed your father's life are still out there, James. Titan Construction is gone, but its founders started a new company in 2003, Apex Building Group. They're one of the largest construction firms in the Northwest now, and they're still cutting corners, still bribing officials, still putting lives at risk for profit. I have evidence that could bring them down, but I'm 72 years old with a bad heart. I don't have time to fight this battle. You do. There's one more thing you need to know, something I couldn't write here. Eleanor has a sealed letter for you. She'll give it to you when you're ready. It contains information about Apex that changes everything. Information about what they're planning next. But James, understand this. If you choose to fight, they'll come after you the way they came after your father. They'll lie, threaten, drag you through legal hell. The inheritance will help, but it won't make you invincible. So think carefully. You can take the money, sell this property, live a comfortable life. Honor your father's memory in private. I would understand. Many would call that the wise choice. Or you can finish what your father started. Clear his name. Stop these people from hurting anyone else. Make his sacrifice mean something. Either way, know this. When you stopped to help a stranger on that highway, you proved that kindness isn't coincidence. It's a choice. And now you have to choose again. Not what's easy, but what's right. I wish I could be there to help you. I wish I had more time. But I trust you, James Hamilton. You're your father's son. Whatever you decide, it will be the right choice for you. And maybe, in some way, your father will finally get the justice he deserved. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. Then I locked up the ranch house, climbed into my truck, and drove straight to Eleanor Ashford's home. It was barely 7 in the morning, but this couldn't wait.
Because Robert was right about one thing. I had to choose. And I already knew what my father would have wanted me to do.
Eleanor Ashford opened her door in a silk robe, her hair uncombed, clearly having just woken up. But when she saw my face, she simply nodded and stepped aside. "You found it," she said, not a question. "I found it, all of it. 25 years of evidence against Titan, against Apex Building Group now." I followed her into an elegant sitting room where morning light streamed through tall windows. "Robert said you have something else for me, a sealed letter." Eleanor moved to an antique secretary desk and pulled out a manila envelope. Unlike the others, this one was sealed with red wax, like something from another century. She held it for a moment before handing it to me. "Robert made me promise not to open this. He said only you should read it, after you'd seen everything else, after you understood what your father tried to do." Her voice was heavy with emotion. "But I can tell you what he told me. This letter contains information about Apex's current project, something that makes stopping them urgent." I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Robert's handwriting and a USB drive. "James, I'm sorry to burden you with this, but you deserve to know the full truth. Apex Building Group is currently constructing a new elementary school in Billings, Jefferson Elementary, on the south side. It's a $30 million project scheduled to open in 6 months. 500 children will attend. I've obtained internal documents, they're on the USB drive, that show Apex is using the same tactics they used 25 years ago. Substandard materials, bribed inspectors, structural shortcuts that will save them $2 million, but create a building that won't meet earthquake or wind load requirements. Your father tried to stop them from building a shopping complex with these same violations. He failed, but at least that building was commercial space, mostly empty at night. Jefferson Elementary will be full of children every day. If this school is completed as designed, it's only a matter of time before something fails. A wall collapse, a ceiling cave-in, a fire that spreads too fast because the suppression system is inadequate. Children will die, James. Not might die, will die. I've tried to stop this through official channels. I filed anonymous complaints with the building department. Nothing happened. Apex has too many connections. I hired a structural engineer to review the plans. He confirmed my fears, but won't testify publicly. He's afraid of retaliation. I was going to go public myself, but then my heart started acting up, and I knew I was running out of time. Then you stopped on that highway, and I realized fate was giving me, giving us, one last chance. The USB drive contains everything: internal emails, altered blueprints, payment records to corrupt inspectors. With this evidence and the historical documents about Titan, you can prove a pattern. You can stop Jefferson Elementary from being built this way. You can finally bring these people down. But you need to move fast. The school is 60% complete. Once it's finished and occupied, it becomes much harder to stop. You have maybe 3 months. This is the choice, James. Take the inheritance and walk away knowing children might die, or use what I've given you to fight and face the same consequences your father faced. I know it's not fair to put this on you, but life rarely is. Your father understood that, and I think you do too." I looked up at Eleanor, who was watching me with red-rimmed eyes. "Did you know about this? About the school?" "Not the details. Robert kept this part from me. I think he wanted to protect me. But I knew he was worried about something current, something urgent. That's why he moved so quickly after meeting you." She sat down heavily. "James, there's something else you should know. Yesterday afternoon, I received a call from a lawyer representing Apex Building Group."
My stomach dropped. What? They know about the inheritance. I don't know how. Maybe someone at the attorney's office talked, or maybe they've been watching Robert all along. But they're threatening to contest the will. They claim Robert was mentally incompetent when he changed it, that you somehow influenced him during your brief meeting. That's insane. I didn't even know who he was. I know, and their case is baseless. But James, that's not the point. The point is to tie you up in legal proceedings, drain your resources, make fighting them so expensive and exhausting that you give up. Eleanor's voice hardened. I've lived with Robert for 42 years. I've seen how these people operate. They don't play fair. They destroy anyone who threatens them. I paced to the window, looking out at Eleanor's manicured garden. 3 months, 500 children, my father's unfinished fight, Robert's desperate last hope. What would you do? I asked quietly. If you were me. Eleanor was silent for so long, I turned to look at her. She was crying. I would ask myself what Robert died believing. He died believing that kindness isn't coincidence, that good people still exist, that his last act, helping you, giving you these tools, would matter. He died with hope, James. After 25 years of guilt and failure, he died believing that maybe, finally, justice was possible. She stood and walked over to me, placing a hand on my arm. But I would also understand if you walked away. You didn't ask for this burden. You just stopped to help a stranger. You don't owe Robert anything. You don't owe your father's memory anything. Sometimes survival is enough. I thought about my father, about the years he'd spent working under fake names, always looking over his shoulder, dying too young with his reputation destroyed. I thought about Robert spending his last evening on Earth changing his will, trusting a stranger to finish what he'd started. And I thought about 500 children who'd walk into Jefferson Elementary next fall, unaware that the walls around them were built on corruption and lies. The lawyer Robert mentioned in his notes, the one he recommended, did he leave contact information? Eleanor smiled through her tears. In the desk, along with the name of a journalist who's been investigating construction corruption for years. Robert had it all ready. And the witnesses, the people willing to testify? Their statements are notarized, filed with Robert's attorney. They're waiting for someone brave enough to bring a case. I nodded slowly, my mind made up. Then I guess I should start making calls, because if Apex wants a fight, they're gonna get one. Eleanor hugged me then, fiercely, like I was the son she'd never had. Robert knew. He knew you'd choose this. That's why he trusted you with everything. As I left her house, USB drive in hand, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. Apex would come after me with everything they had. The inheritance would help, but Eleanor was right. They'd make my life hell. But for the first time since my father died, I understood why he'd made the choice he did. Some things are worth fighting for, even when you know you'll lose almost everything. Kindness isn't coincidence. It's a choice we make when the world gives us every reason not to. And I was choosing to fight.
The next 3 months were the hardest of my life. I wish I could say it was all heroic and straightforward, but the truth is messier than that. Fighting powerful people always is. I started by contacting Marcus Webb, the attorney Robert had recommended, a weathered man in his 60s who'd spent his career taking on corporate corruption. When I showed him the evidence, he literally laughed out loud. "This is a prosecutor's dream," he said, flipping through the documents. "But you need to understand what you're walking into. Apex has 3 law firms on retainer. They'll bury us in motions, drag this out for years, and make your life a living nightmare." I know. No, you don't. They'll investigate every aspect of your life. They'll try to find dirt, and if they can't find it, they'll manufacture it. They'll sue you personally, claim defamation, tie up your assets. The inheritance will help, but legal fees for something like this could run into hundreds of thousands. "What choice do I have?" I asked him. "There's a school full of kids."
Marcus studied me for a long moment, then nodded. All right, let's build a case. We started with the journalist Robert had mentioned, Sarah Chen, an investigative reporter for the Montana Standard who'd spent her career tracking construction industry corruption for a decade. When I met her at a coffee shop in downtown Billings and showed her the USB drive, her hands started shaking. I've been chasing rumors about Apex for 3 years, she said, scrolling through the files on her laptop. But I could never get proof. This is everything. Internal emails admitting they're using substandard materials, payment records to inspectors. My God, they're not even trying to hide it. Can you publish it? Not yet. I need to verify everything, get independent confirmation. But James, this is going to blow up. When this hits, Apex won't just fight you legally, they'll try to destroy your credibility, claim you fabricated evidence, maybe even press criminal charges for theft of proprietary documents. Everyone kept warning me about what I was risking, but nobody seemed to understand that I'd already made my choice the moment I read my father's name in those files. Within 2 weeks, Apex proved everyone right. Their attorneys filed a lawsuit contesting Robert's will, claiming I'd exploited a dying man. They got a temporary injunction freezing the inheritance funds. Marcus had anticipated this, but it still stung. Then they went after my job, filing complaints with my employer claiming I'd stolen confidential information from work sites. My boss called me in, concerned and confused, and I had to explain everything. This is insane, he said. But James, I have to put you on administrative leave while we investigate. I'm sorry. So suddenly I was unemployed with frozen assets and mounting legal bills. Marcus was working partially pro bono, but there were still costs. Filing fees, expert witnesses, depositions. I started draining my savings account, watching years of careful planning disappear into the legal system's hungry maw. But I wasn't alone. Eleanor Ashford became my fiercest advocate, giving interviews where she defended Robert's final wishes and called out Apex's intimidation tactics. The witnesses Robert had found started coming forward, emboldened by the fact that someone was finally fighting back. A structural engineer named David Park reviewed the Jefferson Elementary plans and confirmed they violated multiple building codes. And Sarah Chen kept digging. She found more evidence, other projects where Apex had cut corners, other inspectors on their payroll. She connected Apex's leadership directly to the old Titan construction executives, proving this wasn't just corporate negligence, but a decades-long pattern of deliberate fraud. 2 months after I'd opened that metal box at Robert's ranch house, Sarah published her investigation, Building on Corruption: How Apex Building Group Endangers Lives for Profit, ran as a 5-part series with my father's story at its heart, the whistleblower who tried to stop this 25 years ago and paid with his career. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Parents of Jefferson Elementary students organized protests. The state attorney general announced an investigation. Other victims came forward, families who'd lost loved ones in Apex building failures, workers who'd been injured due to safety violations. But Apex didn't fold. They doubled down, calling the articles defamatory, claiming Sarah had been manipulated by a disgruntled opportunist, me. They filed more lawsuits. Their PR firm launched a campaign painting me as someone trying to profit from a tragedy, using a dead man's guilt to extract money from a legitimate business.
There were days I wanted to quit. Days when the legal bills piled so high I couldn't see how to continue. Days when I'd sit in Robert's ranch house, which had become my refuge, and wonder if my father had felt the same crushing weight, the same realization that doing the right thing might cost you everything. But then I'd remember the photograph I'd found, my father and Robert shaking hands, 2 men trying to stop something terrible. My father hadn't quit, even when it destroyed him. Robert hadn't quit, spending 25 years building a case no one thought would matter. I couldn't quit either. The breakthrough came in month 3. An Apex employee, a project manager named Michael Torres, walked into Marcus Webb's office with his own documentation. He'd been ordered to falsify inspection reports on Jefferson Elementary, and his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent any longer.
"I have kids," he told us, his voice breaking. "I kept thinking, what if they went to a school I'd helped make unsafe? I can't, I won't be part of this anymore." His testimony was devastating. A current employee with recent documentation confirming everything we'd alleged. Marcus immediately filed an emergency motion to halt construction on Jefferson Elementary, citing imminent danger to public safety. The judge, a woman named Margaret Hernandez who'd been following Sarah's articles, granted a temporary stop work order. She scheduled a full hearing for 2 weeks later, giving both sides time to present evidence. Those 2 weeks felt like 2 years. Apex's lawyers worked overtime, filing motions to dismiss, attacking Michael Torres's credibility, demanding the stop work order be lifted. But we had momentum now. More whistleblowers came forward. Engineers volunteered to inspect the Jefferson site. The parents' protest group grew to hundreds of people. At the hearing, Marcus presented our case methodically. The historical pattern from Titan construction, the current violations at Jefferson Elementary, and the internal documents proving Apex knew exactly what they were doing. David Park testified about the structural dangers. Michael Torres described being pressured to falsify reports. And I testified about my father, about Thomas Hamilton, the construction worker who'd tried to do the right thing in 1999 and lost everything. About how Robert Ashford had spent 25 years trying to finish what my father started. About how I'd stopped to help a stranger on a highway and inherited a responsibility I never asked for, but couldn't ignore. "They destroyed my father's life for speaking up," I told Judge Hernandez. "I can't let them destroy these children's futures by staying silent." Apex's lawyers tried to tear me apart on cross-examination, suggesting I'd fabricated evidence, manipulated Robert, orchestrated everything for financial gain. But the documents spoke for themselves. The pattern was undeniable. The danger was real. Judge Hernandez took 3 days to rule. When her decision came down, it was comprehensive and damning. She upheld the stop work order, ordered a complete third-party inspection of Jefferson Elementary, and referred the case to the state attorney general for criminal investigation. In her written opinion, she noted that the evidence presents a disturbing pattern of corporate negligence spanning decades, endangering public safety for profit. The next 6 months were a blur. The Attorney General's investigation expanded to other Apex projects. Criminal charges were filed against 3 executives, including 2 who'd been with Titan in 1999. The civil lawsuits multiplied. Families of people killed or injured in Apex building failures, workers who'd been retaliated against for raising safety concerns. Apex fought every step, but the walls were closing in. Inspectors they'd bribed were offered immunity for testimony. More employees came forward. Financial records showed a systematic pattern of cutting costs by violating building codes. In the end, Apex Building Group was forced into bankruptcy. The executives facing criminal charges pleaded guilty to fraud and reckless endangerment. Jefferson Elementary was completely redesigned and rebuilt to proper specifications, paid for by Apex's liquidated assets. And my father's name was cleared. Sarah Chen wrote a follow-up article, "Thomas Hamilton, the Whistleblower Who Was Right." It detailed everything he'd tried to do, how he'd been punished for his integrity, how his evidence had ultimately brought down the same corruption he'd exposed 25 years earlier. The lawsuit contesting Robert's will was quietly dropped. The inheritance was released. I paid Marcus Webb, donated a substantial amount to construction safety advocacy groups, and set up a scholarship fund in my father's name for working-class students pursuing engineering degrees. The ranch house became something more than Robert's refuge. I turned it into a training center, a place where construction workers could learn about safety regulations, where whistleblowers could get legal support, where the industry could do better. I called it the Hamilton Ashford Center for Construction Safety. Eleanor Ashford attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony, now in her late 60s, but with more energy than I'd seen in our first meeting. "Robert would be so proud," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You finished what he started, what your father started." "We all finished it together," I told her, because that was the truth. I hadn't done this alone. Robert gave me the tools. Eleanor gave me support. Marcus gave me legal expertise. Sarah gave me a platform. Michael Torres and others gave me corroboration. All the witnesses who'd been too afraid to speak for 25 years finally gave their testimony. Sometimes I drive out to the cemetery where my father is buried, under the name he died with, Thomas Henley, because he never lived to see his real name restored. I bring flowers and sit beside his grave and tell him about Jefferson Elementary, now safely rebuilt and full of children, about the Apex executives in prison, about the safety regulations that came from all this, new oversight laws, stronger whistleblower protections, mandatory third-party inspections. "You were right, Dad," I tell him. "It was worth it. All of it." I think about that afternoon on Highway 87 when I stopped to help a stranger with a broken-down Lincoln Continental. How a simple choice, just pulling over, just offering help, led to all of this. How Robert Ashford recognized my father's kindness in that moment and decided to trust me with his final mission. Kindness isn't coincidence. Robert wrote that over and over in his notebooks, and I finally understand what he meant. Kindness is a choice that ripples outward in ways we can't predict. My father's choice to speak up in 1999. Robert's choice to spend 25 years seeking justice. My choice to stop on a highway. Every choice mattered. Every act of integrity, every moment of courage, every decision to help someone, even when it's inconvenient, they all connect, creating chains of consequence that span decades and generations. I still work as a civil engineer, though now I spend half my time at the Hamilton Ashford Center teaching workers about safety, reviewing plans pro bono for anyone concerned about violations. I didn't become an architect like I once dreamed, but I'm building something more important, a foundation of safety and integrity in an industry that desperately needs both. And sometimes, when I'm driving Montana's lonely highways, I still stop for stranded motorists, because you never know whose life you might save, whose story you might change, whose quest for justice you might inherit. Robert Ashford left me $500,000 and 50 acres, but what he really gave me was purpose, the chance to finish my father's fight, to prove that speaking up matters, that standing for what is right has consequences that echo far beyond our own lives. That's worth more than any inheritance. That's worth everything.